The national interest is anything that causes embarrassment or shows how ridiculous or exposes to ridicule the current narrative of the next current thing. This is insane, right? This is where we are. Hello, everyone. Chris Martinson of Peak Prosperity here. This is a scouting report. I'm going to put some of this out in the public sphere, and the rest is for my subscribers. This is truly potentially a very explosive report with also some explanatory power. So we're trying to make sense of the world we live in today. What world is that? We're going to have to get a little bit wonky for a second and talk about this crazy thing called FASAB, the Financial Accounting Standard Board 56. Because we're trying to answer this question, just how fraudulent are things today? I think this gets us close to the answer. And so it begins here with this amazing article back in 2019 by Matt Taibbi. If it skipped your notice, don't worry. Who reads wonky sort of accounting related things? But man, does it matter, particularly everything we've been talking about with respect to the great taking, the whole idea of how the legal system and the financial machinery have all sort of been rigged for the ruling parties and against everybody else. This is potentially the heart of the rigging. So we got to understand this. This very instructive as to just how crazy things have become and how far off the rails, how un-American, how undemocratic, how unfair, unequal, everything has become. Let's talk about this because this is a fractal representation of that. If you understand this, you can understand much of the rest of the fraud. So, he said, has government legalized secret defense spending? And I'm going to make the argument that it has, and it's gone further than that. Quote, the only thing that did not make the news of this past week, which was at the week this was written, he's talking about there's a lot of big news that week. The only thing that did not make the news was an announcement by a little-known government body called the Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board, FASAB, that essentially legalized secret national security spending. Oh no, little person, you can't know what's going on, right? That would create government hesitancy on your part. The new guidance, SFAS 56, classified activities, quotes, permits government agencies to modify, quotes, public financial statements and move expenditures from one line item to another. It also expressly allows federal agencies to refrain from telling taxpayers if and when public financial statements have been altered. To Michigan State professor, I'm laughing because this is so absurd. And it happened, by the way. To Michigan State professor Mark Skidmore, who's been studying discrepancies in defense expenditures for years, the new ruling and the lack of public response to it was a shock. And it is shocking. Quote, from this point forward, he says, the federal government will keep two sets of books, one modified book for the public and a true book that is hidden. Wow, if you thought your trust couldn't get dinged any harder, we just find new stuff week after week. This is how far off the reservation we've gone. The story of openly secret budgets really began in 1949 with the passage of the Central Intelligence Agency Act. The law exempted the newly christened spy agency from public financial disclosure. Well, what is the CIA up to? And then later that same CIA would be in charge of setting up the Depository Trust Clearing Corporation apparatus, which is, as you've now learned through the Great Taking series I've been doing, that is largely a skimming operation of, by, and for the very few, thieving and stealing and skimming from the very many, you and me, right? So why would they need to keep all of this hidden? Well, you can imagine there's some certain clandestine operation things. There's some thing that has to be done in the interest of national security, and we got to keep that hidden. But you know how these things are. It's a slippery slope. The camel's nose gets under the tent, and next thing you know, the whole camel is under the tent. That's what happened very, very quickly, I believe, in this same example, because where did all the money that used to not be flowing because the Taliban had shut down heroin production in Afghanistan, and suddenly we read there's 8,000 tons of that coming back out? Where's that money go? Or how have all these big dynastic families managed to keep their money hidden and all of that? It requires a system that helps obfuscate and control. So we're going to talk about where we are today. This is exceedingly relevant. All right, the CIA Act was a radical departure from the Constitution, right? Which is clear about public accounting. This is Matt Taibbi's emphasis is in dark down there in bold. No money. This is the Constitution. This is the supreme law of the land. The Supreme Court's been clear on this. Everybody's clear on this. This is the supreme law. There are no more supreme laws than this that have been openly talked about. There could be other laws, but this is the supreme law of the land, which reads, no money shall be drawn from the treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law, and a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. Well, the CIA Act created a blunt constitutional carve-out. The sums made available to the agency may be expended without regard to the provisions of law and regulations relating to the expenditure of government funds, the law reads. Okay, if you're going to do that, you have to have some other ruling body that has authority that can look at that and has transaction-level audit control so that you can find out when, not if, when it turns out that stuff has been misappropriated. People have lives. We're all human. There's never enough. Some people are greedy. They have mistresses. They want to siphon money off for themselves. They have reasons. Their kids are getting into college. Guess what? When it comes to money, humans cannot be trusted. You have to have some sort of oversight. So you would think that when they say, well, the agency gets to be this totally ungoverned, non-oversight body that can just spend whatever it wants and nobody can look at it, that's a recipe for disaster. And that is in no small measure the disaster we are currently experiencing in the United States. Whoever set this up, bunch of dummies, just didn't understand humans. We had weak leaders in there who just fundamentally failed at history and human studies 101. Because guess what? When it comes to people and money, well, it's for the love of money is the root of all evil. Did evil take off here? Oh, you bet it did. And no question about it. That's how these things work. Carrying on. The sums made available to the agency may be expended without regard to the provision of law and regulations relating to the expenditure of government funds, the law read, for objects of a confidential, extraordinary, or emergency nature. Such expenditures to be announced for solely on the certificate of the director of the CIA. In other words, while other government agencies had to account for their expenses, the word of the CIA director was good enough when it came to what they had spent and why. Oh, yeah, only if it's an emergency. There's this coronavirus with a 99.5% survival rate. That's an emergency. Oh, no, the moon is going to pass in front of the sun here on April 8th. That's an emergency. Guess what? Nose of the camel gets under the tent, and then the whole camel's in the tent. Everything's an emergency, and now we don't have to tell anybody. And this is a recipe for disaster. Now, what we're going to be exploring here is what happens when that camel gets all the way under the tent. But to set that up, we're going to talk about this. All right. At roughly the same, this is carrying on the same Matt Taibbi article. Awesome article. At roughly the same time as the church hearings, an insurance adjuster named William Richardson got fed up. He filed suit against the U.S. government. Richardson wanted secret CIA budgets declared unconstitutional. He barely made the news. It was a page 8 blip in the New York Times, even though he made it all the way to the Supreme Court. Nonetheless, he went all the way there to that Supreme Court, and by a thin, 5-4 vote. Oh, so close, citizen. You were this close to having your rights preserved. Remember, this is the Supreme Court where everything that goes for the government is a 5-4 vote to create the appearance that there's some close balance, that there's a check and balance involved. But Kelo v. New London, where the government can take your home for no good reason, even a local municipality, as happened in the case of New London, Connecticut, against that woman Kelo, who had her home seized for a Pfizer facility, seized the home, razed it, and then they never actually bothered building that facility there. So it was taken for no reason, no good. But still, that decision, 5-4. Oh, Citizens United, which was the greatest travesty against the right of our democracy, right? Again, razor thin margins. Oh, it's 5-4. So anyway, whenever you see 5-4, you know that the citizens really just got shafted. Chief Justice Warren Burger wrote the majority opinion, citing an earlier ruling. He said, in essence, a random citizen whose only problem was that he didn't know where his taxes were going did not have standing to waste the high court's time. Oh, no standing, citizen. even though the Constitution clearly says you have standing in this regard, and it's easy to read and anybody can totally understand it. Simple. They had to rule on the no standing, because if they didn't have that, they'd have to actually rule on the merits of the case, in which case they would have said, yeah, this is totally unconstitutional. And they didn't want to do that because obviously the big state government, deep state, wanted totally untraceable, very powerful appropriations and expenditures by a secretive spy organization, right? And that they wanted that. Next question you would have, because I know how you think, is can we see the bank records of Chief Justice Warren Burger? I mean, Warren, you've set yourself up for this. People are going to have questions like that, right? You don't get to have this unsullied reputation as I was a Supreme Court justice, and therefore nobody can ever question me because I'm just this amazing human being because I made it to the Supreme Court. You do a BS ruling like this, and people are going to go, I think maybe something's wrong with this story. This doesn't smell right, not even slightly. It's not legal. It's extra legal. It has nothing to do with the Constitution. So there you have it. A taxpayer, Berger wrote, may not employ a federal court as a forum in which to air his generalized grievances about the conduct of government. No, just show up outside the government sometime and hold a protest. Oh, no, you can't do that. That would be an insurrection. Actually, forget about it. Even though the Constitution says that you have right to petition the government for redress, not your citizen. Now, I am going somewhere with this. This has really big, powerful implications for today. But first, we have to talk about this, which is fast forward 16 years, again, still from the Matt Taibbi article in Rolling Stone, back when Rolling Stone actually had interesting articles and didn't turn into a complete Pfizer apology center. Fast forward 16 years, when in the second year of office, George H.W. Bush, that's Bush the first, Congress passed the Chief Financial Officers Act of 1990. This new law was aimed at curbing billions of dollars said to be lost each year through fraud and waste, abuse and mismanagement of public budgets. It demanded that 23 major federal agencies, including the Departments of Defense, Justice, Interior, many others, designate a CFO and file regular reports, like you have to if you're a public company or public government, right? These reports would be in the form of complete, reliable, timely, and consistent financial information for use by the executive branch. What happened? And to create a more uniform standard for this reporting, the government created FASAB in that same year. And the new Accounting Standards Bureau was designed to help make apples-to-apples comparisons between budgets of government departments. And with the passage of the CFO Act, the Pentagon was supposed to begin delivering intelligible numbers about its expenditures. It did not. Year after year passed without audits, and finally Congress appropriated money to hire outside auditors like Ernst & Young to do the work, which was completed last year. And on November 15, 2018, however, the Department of Defense failed its first audit, which was conducted by 1,200 auditors. We couldn't make sense of this. And this was after 26 years of what Senator Chuck Grassley out of Iowa called hardcore foot dragging. We failed the audit, but we never expected to pass it, was the defensive Deputy Secretary of Defense Patrick Shanahan said at the time. What? Anyway, let's carry on, because this is as silly as it gets. Still from that same Matt Taibbi article, he writes here that the Pentagon failed its audit was no surprise. There had already been significant hints that even the supposedly legal version of defense budgeting was an indecipherable morass. On the day before 9/11, for instance, who remembers this? 9/10. Then Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld announced that according to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion with a T in transactions. Okay, right? Remember that? And then the following day's events obviously distracted the media from that shock announcement. And in 2015, the Office of the Inspector General found that the Army alone, which had a budget of $122 billion that year, had $6.5 trillion with a T in year-end adjustments that they could not adequately support. Who even knows? You're wondering, why is inflation more than we think? We don't even know what the government's actually spending. And you know what? They don't even know. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, right? Skidmore, again, Mark Skidmore, the professor, said he was dumbfounded by the numbers, and he says, when I saw that first report from 2015 was 6.5 trillion, I thought, that's impossible. That can't be. So he went out and added it up and found out actually it was 21 trillion across the government, or I think mostly in the DoD. Anyway, it's just a hot mess of spending. And we're now going to turn to what this actually means. And this rest is going to be for my subscribers, because we get into here what I think now are some really important developments around what's going on in our equity markets today, in our financial markets. I'm going to connect a lot of dots, but I'm going to have to do that over at Peak Prosperity, because this is for my subscribers who like to go deeper.